Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Philip Roberts, and alongside me are my buddies Will and Jeff. They will be assisting me on this instructional video on how to smoke a brisket. When choosing a brisket, you want to look at a few different things. First, you need to know the size of the brisket that you want, which depends on the size of crowd you're feeding. The second consideration is the meat grade that you want. They'll come in different grades like choice, prime, and wagyu, just to name a few. Wagyu is the best as it breaks down better when cooking and is more tender. Today we are going to smoke a 15-pound prime brisket.
When you buy a whole brisket, it will have a lot of fat on it. Trimming that fat correctly is critical to preparing the brisket. If you trim too much, you may expose the meat to direct heat. Trim too little, the fat may not render properly. You want to trim so that there's about 1/4 inch of the fat left on the brisket. This allows the smoke to penetrate the brisket to add a good level of moisture and great flavor. The fat cap, also known as the decal, can be removed as well if preferred. Now that the trimming is complete, we're going to apply the seasoning to the brisket.
When it comes to seasoning the brisket, you want to season it to your taste. For this brisket, we are keeping it simple with crushed pepper, sea salt, and garlic powder. Just remember that when you are seasoning it, if you add too much, it can overpower the meat. To make the seasoning stick, we are going to use mustard as a binder and then add our seasoning all around the brisket.
Now it is time to prepare the smoker. For this smoke, we are going to use post oak wood. Right here in the chute where the wood and charcoal goes, we will layer charcoal and wood throughout it until the chute is completely full. Then we will light the smoker. After the smoker is lit, we will wait for it to get to 225 degrees, which is our smoking temperature, and bring the brisket out to put it on.
We're going to use 3 different probes for this smoke. One on the smoker to make sure it's maintaining the correct temperature, and the other 2 on each ends of the brisket to make sure that they're cooking evenly.
Now that the brisket has reached an internal temperature of 170, we pulled it off the smoker and brought it in to wrap it. This is known as a Texas crutch. You can use either foil paper or butcher paper to wrap it, whatever you prefer. For this smoke, we are going to use butcher paper. Before wrapping it, we will add butter and a tad bit more of our rub to help it stay nice and moist. Once you get it wrapped, you want to put it back on the smoker so it can continue smoking. We want the internal temperature to reach 197 to 203 after wrapping it.
We will put the wrapped brisket back on the smoker until the internal temperature reaches 197 to 203.
We're pulling the brisket at 199 degrees internal temperature. Now we're going to let the brisket rest for a few hours.
During the resting period, the brisket cools off and the muscle fiber breaks down. This allows it to redistribute the moisture throughout the meat. which is very essential if you want a moist brisket.
Finally, the time has come to remove the butcher paper and slice the brisket. As we place the brisket on the cutting board, you will notice that we're slicing it perpendicular to the grain. We are cutting the brisket into 1/4 inch thick slices. You can slice the fattier section off first and slice it into pieces. Then you can move on to the flat, leaner section of the brisket. Now that looks good and juicy.
We want to thank you all for watching this instructional video on how to smoke a brisket. Now we're going to enjoy this nice juicy brisket that we smoked.